What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 595. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, how you doing, bud?
What's up? Oh, I'm doing great. I just fresh off a really sweet stream where I drafted Celestia.
Yeah, I was watching. I was working on a watch and over here, and I had you up on the background, and then you kind of got to the end of pack one with a bunch of really good green cards and a few good white cards, and you're like, I thought, is he really going to do this? And you really did it.
Yeah, basically it was a combo deck where I had a Dragon's Guard Elite and 4 Quandrix Pledge Mages, so 5 Magecraft 2/2s that get counters, alongside 2 Study Breaks, 2 Guiding Voices, 2 Expanded Anatomy, and having both was actually really important, like Reflective Golem and a bunch of like cantrips and 2 Shows of Confidence. So basically what happened is at the end of pack 2 or so, I had mostly green cards, 4 blue cards, but I had picked up a late Study Break and a late Guiding Voice just because there were nothing else in the pack. And then when another Guiding Voice and Study Break wheeled, I'm like, no, these are just better than my blue cards. So I just pivoted into white and ended up going 7-1 for the trophy with a really sweet deck that just, I had multiple opponents scoop on like turn 4 when I was like, turn 2, Stonerise Spirit, turn 3, Quandrix Pledge Mage, turn 4, big play plus Show of Confidence, attack you with like a 9/9 and a 5/5. And they're just like, yeah, okay, I'm done here.
Oh, it was fantastic. And you were running through your opponents there. Yeah. Really nice work. And doesn't come up often to play, a straight up non-college guild. But when it does, sometimes it can come together and win. And would you say, Luis, that part of the success you had with that deck was that you identified combos within it?
Oh, definitely. That deck was all about the combos. And in fact, that's a great segue into what we're going to be talking about today. This is Killer Combos, Strixhaven Edition. That's and right. We'll get into that soon, but I'm excited to talk about some combos.
That's right. We're going to be talking about those combos. Little, 2, sometimes 3, but usually 2 card combos that you should be aware of in the format, as well as just little interactions, little rules things, little things that you should just keep in mind in case you haven't come across them yet. And we've got kind of some we've got enough for everybody here. If you haven't got a chance to play the format a ton, you'll learn a bit. And even if you're pretty deep on the format, then you'll learn something here as well. Before we get into our main topic, though, got some stuff to cover here. First things first, our sponsor, channelfireball.com. And, they still got box breaks going over there. channelfireball.com/box breaks or cfbboxbreaks.com. Either way, you can, this is a way that you can kind of get a part of a sealed product that without having to shell it out for the whole entire thing. Huge range of different box breaks that they've got going over there, from, commander decks that you can open up to old packs or booster boxes to, one that kind of caught my eye is there's a Japanese mixer box break. And that one has Japanese language booster boxes. Ikoria CBB, it says War of the Spark, Amonkhet, Ixalan, Ravnica, Allegiance, and Hour of Devastation. And the way it works is if you sign up for one, there will be 8 categories in for this one, for example, which are black, blue, green, red, white, colorless, multicolor, and land. When you sign up, you're going to get one of those. And then when they do the stream, they'll randomize for that. So you'll find out, all right, I'm the one who gets all the land cards, let's say, out of these. And then they open up the packs live on stream. You get to watch. So you get the sweat. And then they'll send you it. Like if you happen to get land, you'll get all the lands out of these Japanese boxes, for example. So it's a cool way where you're going to get kind of some of everything from a bunch of different booster boxes, which would be kind of difficult to get together yourself, and way more expensive to have to get all of it, where you can just get, effectively an 1/8 of these here. And, you can check out all the details over at cfbboxbreaks.com or channelfireball.com/boxbreaks. And, as always, if you do head over to CFB or any of their things, if you would use the affiliate code LR at checkout, it does help out the show and we do appreciate it. The show is also brought to you by you via the Patreon. That's patreon.com/limited resources. If you sign up, it's really nice because you can sign up for however much you want. It's fully flexible. It's also changeable at any time. And it's also transparent. You can also set a limit per month. Like if you're on kind of a cap, you can say, okay, I'll sign up for this much, but only if, on average, we release 4 shows a month, but occasionally it's 5, occasionally it's 3, depending on how things go. You can kind of set those limits for yourself however you see fit. That way it fits exactly what your budget and what your wishes are. If you do sign up, you get a thank you card and a sticker in the mail, and there's a whole bunch of other perks that you can get as you kind of work your way up. We do want to thank everybody over at Patreon for supporting us there as well. One of the cool things you get just at any level of patron is you get access to the Patreon feed, which the two of the main things that you'll get from that are, one of them is you can ask questions for the Patreon question of the week, or if we have like a guest on the show or a special topic, like our Q&A episodes where we reach out to our patrons for questions, you'll get access to that. And then also, if you're a patron, you'll get access to the live shows. So like right now, we have a chat room going with people watching us record the show live, where you can see all the behind the scenes stuff, us chatting before and after the show, and any mistakes that happen that don't make it to the final cut. You'll get to see all of that. And then, you can also chat with us and stuff as we record the show. So, but I mentioned the Patreon question of the week, and we have that from Nathan here, who says, what type of card that is usually unplayable, like maybe a fog effect or something like that, would you like to see receive a power level boost to make it playable? Conversely, what effect do you wish Wizards would power down in the future?
Well, I would not like to see fogs be more playable. There's a reason there really hasn't been very many good fogs printed. When fog is good, it is miserable. For those who haven't played with fog, this is the original card from Alpha. It's 1 green mana, creatures don't deal damage in combat this turn. And there have been a lot of versions of this card. Clearly, it's a card that speaks to people, and I think it's fine to keep printing it. I think the worst thing they did was make constant mists. This was a card aptly named. It was 1 and a green, instant. Yeah, creatures don't deal damage, but you could buy it back by sacking a land, which means you could just fog every turn. It wasn't even particularly good in most situations, but it was just really aggravating to play against. And if you remember this is more constructed, but the same could be true in limited if you powered it up too much. The Wilderness Reclamation Nexus of Fate decks played a bunch of fogs, and Turbo Fog is a classic strategy that no one really likes to play against. So definitely not fog. I think it's interesting when life gain cards are good. Mm-hmm. Cram Session is pretty good in this format, gain 4 life, learn. And that is one of the more playable pure life gain cards. Yes, it does something other than just gain life, but I think that it still leads to cool gameplay. My favorite in this set, I think that is an example of this, is Expanded Anatomy. Give a creature a 2++1 counters and vigilance this turn. That card is one of the best lessons. It's actually awesome. It looked like crap. It's a straight sorcery speed creature buff, and somehow it's just great. And that sort of thing is really cool. So
there's a reason it's great. Because when it's great, those type of cards overperform. But when they're bad, they vastly underperform. And the fact that you can basically pick them up free-ish, but you get to select from that, maybe environmental sciences and, introduction to annihilation or some type of, or a summoning or something like that, is when that card is great, then it's going to come down and be awesome. I don't know if you've seen the 17 lands data on it, but it's really high. But it makes sense because, 17 lands tries to tease out the card's real value by showing you the percentage of wins when it was drawn, right? That's kind of where they've narrowed it down, is when you draw this card, how often are you winning? And that should theoretically filter out for cards that are prohibitively expensive or have an absurd mana cost that isn't very often castable, because a lot of times you will have drawn it, but you can't cast it, right? Or cards that are extremely situational, where you almost always win when you do cast it, but all the other times it doesn't do anything. That stat should filter for that. But with lesson cards particularly, it doesn't, right? Because people aren't going to get that off of their learns unless it's a situation where it's going to overperform, which is awesome, right? That means that you can have that type of a card in a set and not have the pressure on it that it always just has to be good in your deck or you can't run it. Because if that card wasn't a lesson card, it would just never see play, right? People just wouldn't be interested in sorcery speed, 2+1/+1 counters and a minor buff, for a full 3 mana. That would just be considered a bad combat trick or something along those lines. But the fact that you can wait till the dust is settled, or if you have a particularly good creature or creature with ward or something like that, buffs it up a bit.
I largely agree. Mm-hmm. I think that expanded anatomy still is even better, even accounting for that. It's better than everyone thought it was going to be, and better than it looks. Like, even when you know, like, hey, I only get this card when it's going to be good, it just ends up being good way more often than you would have predicted, right? Like, how often do you get expanded anatomy? Often.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't, like, I've still never put it in my main deck.
Well, no. You wouldn't put it in your main deck. I agree that so much of the power is wrapped up in the, like, learn part, but I find when I have expanded anatomy as one of my options, I get it more than any other lesson, I think. Like,
come on, you get environmental sciences more than that.
I'm actually a lot lower on environmental sciences than I was a week ago.
Interesting. What happened?
I think that it's a combination of not wanting to spend my, like, early turns doing this and then playing 2-color decks more often than 3-color decks.
I see.
I've been drafting a little bit more aggressive, assertive decks, and I wouldn't classify this format as an aggressive one, but you have to be doing something pretty fast, or you are going to end up in trouble. Like, even your Quandrix decks that, like, definitely not an aggressive deck, they want to put a lot of stuff on the board. It's part of the reason I value Mage Duel very highly now, because it's a way to double spell, like, really easily.
And a board affecting double spell too.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Needle Thorndrake has gone up in my pick order because it's a way to use your turn 2 to make a lot of good progress on the board. So I have found expanded anatomy to be a lot stronger than I predicted, and it continues to impress me, even knowing, like, it has gone from, like, hey, it's good to have this, to, like, I really want this, even in decks that you wouldn't think it would be that high of a priority. It's just such a beating sometimes.
It really is. We were, and, it really looked like a throwaway, right? I mean, it looked like here's something that you could do, that they maybe just wanted to check the box of, like, we want to have something that augments a creature on your board. And this seems like a fair way to do it, but it has definitely outperformed that by a lot. Speaking of, by the way, the second question here, what effect, from Nathan, would we like to see Wizards power down in the future? Well, it turns out the future is now, because the most obvious answer to that is hexproof. And it looks like, I haven't seen confirmation that hexproof is going to be gone, but I would assume that Ward is now hexproof and that we won't see hexproof anymore. And I really like that.
Totally. Boy,
anything that reduces interaction, I don't like, right? Like, I don't even like indestructible. Anything that makes it more difficult to interact with the card, or impossible, I really find frustrating and just not fun, either way. When you have it, it does feel good. Like, it gives you an emotional kind of like, hey, I can't be messed with here. But, I don't know. I always find the games are most interesting when, I like to view a lot of times, playing creatures or threats as, like, asking a question, right? Like, hey, I'm going to put this on the battlefield and you're going to have to do something about it, or it can run away with the game. And what I like about scaling up to rare and mythic rare is that you can ask really pertinent questions at the mythic rare slot. Like, hey, you're going to have to kill this in a turn or maybe 2, or you're just going to be dead. But what I really like is when that can happen. Like, if the person has managed their removal well, or whatever, gets lucky and finds a removal spell, that they still have hope and they can say, okay, I killed your creature, right? And now we're back in business and we're playing Magic again. And this is still a real game. And, hexproof or indestructible are ways that basically blank removal really work against that and make it, just make it feel like, well, what's the point here? Like, I even save my removal spell and it just doesn't even do anything. What was all that work for, kind of thing. And, so I like Ward. Ward is a really nice way to deal with it because it gives them so much flexibility. You can give a creature kind of nearly hexproof, right? You could say, like, well, the thing costs 4 more to target it or something like that, where it really does narrow that window down, but there's still hope. There's still a way, on some level to deal with the threat. And I think that that's a really good step. If they never printed hexproof again, I'd be pretty happy with that.
Yeah. It went Shroud to hexproof, and that was an upgrade because Shroud is no one can target it. That's much weaker because you can't pump it. And then hexproof to Ward is, I agree, a great step.
Okay, so let's get into our crack-a-pack actually, before we get into the main topic and see what we've got here. So to kick things off, I'll start with our lesson card. In this case, it's Spirit Summoning. That's the one that makes a 3/2 spirit for 3 mana. fine. You know, all the summonings have performed reasonably well. I still think that Inkling summoning is the best of them, but you know, I think in many ways you can kind of go down the line on mana cost to kind of rank them. I do like the elemental summoning still quite a bit, the 5 mana 4/4, but fractal summoning has gone down quite a bit for me just because it always feels really slow. Like, sure, if there's nothing else to do, you have a ton of mana, it definitely fills that role, but is kind of going back to what you said before, where I really do feel a lot of pressure to do things in this format. And that means that there's too many situations where I just need something that impacts the board a little more meaningfully. But Spirit Summoning does that. It's fine.
Yeah, I think, like you said, clearly the worst summoning, but it's a card you still want access to if you're in those colors.
Yeah, summoning is important. Next, one of my favorite cards in the format, Eureka Moment. That's the 2 green-blue instant draw 2, and you can put a land from your hand onto the battlefield. Just, I love cards like this.
Yeah, Eureka Moment's good. It shows the depth of Quandrix and really the depth of all the guilds in this set, that this is just not near one of the best Quandrix cards, but it's a card you're very happy to play.
Yeah. Cog Work Archivist is the 6 mana 4/5 with reach. It's an artifact creature, and you can pay 2 mana and tap it to put a card from a graveyard on the bottom of its owner's library.
It's not a card I've ever played, though I think you would play it sometimes in sealed. Mm-hmm. And it's a card that has reach to further really just hammer it home that Magic the Gathering is a game of card reading where you just can't predict. Like I attacked a 2/2 flyer to this and was like, oh, that has reach. Nice.
Right. Totally. Yeah. I've played it once. I brought it in out of the board and it was actually pretty good. You know, I don't think it's going to be making the main deck really ever. It's just a little too clunky, but it does the thing that it says. And, you know, you can mess with their graveyard. You can prevent yourself from getting decked, and it is a good defensive creature. This card's gone down a ton for me. Reckless Amplimancer. That's a 1 and a green 2/2. You can pay 4 and a green to double its power and toughness until end of turn.
This hasn't gone down for me.
Oh, it was already down because I
thought it sucked to begin with, and then
see, I thought it was fine. Like I thought it fit that role of 2 mana thing. You're fine with that, and then you know it gives you a place to put your mana later. But I was wrong on 2 levels of that. First thing is that 2 mana thing isn't good enough. So you know, 2 mana 2/2 in this format just it is too big of a liability, and then. In all reasonable scenarios, you can make this thing into a 4/4. That's your big payoff for your 5 mana, and that just isn't enough. So yeah. It really kind of missed on both ends for me. Relic Sloth, never really see this thing on the battlefield. 3 red, white, 4/4 Vigilance Menace. Fine magic card, right? Like there's nothing wrong with this card, but you don't really see it very often.
Yeah, I don't think this is like this is funny, you know. It's interesting seeing what your intuition, how it lines up, and whether you're kind of like whether the data bears it out. My intuition is this is not a very winning card, but yeah, I tend not to play it, and when I do play against it, I tend to beat it. So
yeah, that's kind of how I feel. I'm not a fan
of the Relic Sloth.
Yeah, same. Star Pupil's an interesting one. That's the 1 mana, the white 0/0, but it ETBs with a +1/+1 counter on it, and when it dies, you can throw its counters onto another creature. You know, we didn't start off super high on this card, but we both kind of had our eye on it as like, there could be something here. You know, these 1-drops tend to kind of sneak up on you. It kind of hasn't though. I have to say that, you know, even against the aggressive decks, when somebody plays Star Pupil, I'm kind of like, oh, okay, that's fine. Like it just never really seems to punish me that badly. Even though early in the format when they played it, I thought, I'm going to get curved out on and ran over. It just hasn't happened that way that often.
Yeah, I agree.
Excavated Wall, 1 mana, 0/4 Defender, pay 1, tap it, mill a card. I don't understand what this card is doing in the format, really.
I could go for more bad cards, actually. I think we have too many playables. You know, the people want more Excavated Walls.
There you go. Sudden Breakthrough is the 1 in a red instant. Target creature gets +2/+0 on first strike until the turn, and you get a treasure token. Kind of interesting because, you know, this card is fine, right? Like it's a fine combat trick. It even gives you a little bit of a bonus, but I don't end up playing it hardly ever. I mean, this is obvious, but I just can't help but compare it to the learn cards, where I'm like, I get a treasure token. Can I learn instead, please? That would be much better for me. And because the fact is that they push learn pretty hard, and you actually get cards roughly of this power level with learn on them. So it makes this one feel worse. You get +3/+0 and trample and learn for an extra mana. It's like, well, I think I'd rather be doing that.
Yeah, the whole treasure learn thing is a little bit weird, but it is it does make sense. Like treasure's like a minor sub theme of Prismari, but I agree this card is pretty disappointing. It's also just not good.
Yeah, it's just not very good. First day of class, 1 in a red, instant. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and it gains haste until end of turn, and you also learn. This is one of the few learn cards that I'm just like, I don't even play it.
Yeah, I don't think this card is particularly effective because most of the learn cards, like especially the ones that make creatures, you want to cast a learn card to get a lesson that makes a creature that you set up for like the next turn. Mm-hmm. This is kind of asking you to do it in the same turn, and it's just going to be hard to get much value from the +1/+1 in haste. You need a lot of mana. It's a pretty scary card later in the game.
It is.
You play this and you play an elemental summoning an attack for 5 or whatever, but like for the most part, not into it.
Promising Dusk Mage has not lived up to its promise. It's 2 and a black for a 2/3, and when it dies, if it had a +1/+1 counter on it, draw a card.
Yeah, not a card.
I don't think I've even seen anybody draw a card off it ever.
You know what? The +1/+1 counter theme has basically missed the last couple times they've done it. It's just not been good. It wasn't good in Zendikar Rising.
Yeah,
not good here. I'm not saying everything has to hit or whatever, but like it would be cool if that at some point hit, because I think it is a kind of cool theme.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's hard to miss with +1/+1 counters because they're just good. But the cards that are meant to pay you off, where you're throwing them around, it just hasn't come together. Next card's been really good. Umbral Juke. This is the 2 and a black instant at uncommon. Choose one. Target player sacrifices a creature or planeswalker, or you get a 2/1 white and black inkling creature token with flying. This card's sweet.
So this is a good example. Fire Ice is always my classic example of like how much flexibility is worth, but Umbral Juke's a good one for limited format. If you take a good card, which is 2 and a black instant, put a 2/1 into play, and a medium card, which is 2 and a black instant, they sack a creature, and combine them, you get a great card.
Yeah.
It actually does work that way. So Umbral Juke is going to be my pick right now.
For sure. Next one's going to give you a run for its money. It's Professor of Symbology. This is the 1 and a white 2/1, and when it ETBs, you learn.
Oh, that doesn't give Umbral Juke a run for its money. It just runs Umbral Juke into the ground. Professor of Symbology is insanely good.
Yeah.
I have a hard time passing this card. It just buttons up your curve nicely, is a 2-mana 2-for-1, can pick up whatever you need, assuming you did your diligence and your due diligence and got enough lessons. I'm very happy first picking up Professor of Symbology.
Yeah, and you can tell that they were very, very careful about putting learn on permanents and on creatures specifically. And, they're like, look, we're going to give you a 2/1 for 2, but you're not getting better than that. And even then it overperforms. Next card is actually somewhat similar. It's Eye Twitch. This is the black 1/1 flyer. And when it dies, you learn. You don't get to craft your plan around it in the same way that Professor of Symbology lets you, where you can go like 2-drop into 3-drop lesson or 2-drop into 2-drop lesson or whatever. But Eye Twitch has been fine. Like, in its worst case, you just play it, chump block it, and you get to learn.
Yeah, no, it's a good card. I always play this. I pick it relatively highly, but it still just can't hold a candle to Professor of Symbology. The Prof is just too good.
Prof is too good. Our rare is Culling Ritual. It's 2 black-green for a sorcery. Destroy each non-land permanent with mana value 2 or less, and then you add black or green mana for each permanent destroyed this way.
I have found this card to be pretty bad for me, but I don't know. I don't know that it's terrible because it can really mess up a bunch of fractals and maybe pay for itself if you do it right. Like the card obviously has the potential to be good. I put it in 3 decks, and every single time I've drawn it, it's been terrible. So
okay, well, that's not great.
I don't really know. I don't want to like say that my 3 experiences were the whole thing or whatever. But I have this behind Eye Twitch, Umbral Juke, and Professor is my pick right now.
Yeah, for me, I've only had it once. I started it in my sideboard. I brought it in. This is in draft best of 3. And I brought it in a matchup that I thought it was going to be really good, and then I just never drew it. So I'm like, well, okay, not a lot of sample there on Culling Ritual. We do have one Mystical Archive card, and it is a classic. It's Counterspell. Blue, instant, counter target spell.
Yeah, Counterspell is very good.
It really is.
Oh, man, this is tough because Counterspell is very good. It's funny how much a mana matters in different spots where Cancel is a throwaway card and Counterspell's not. Mm-hmm. And it's also true that this format, I think Counterspell tends to be better because people telegraph their plays a little more with their lessons. And, this format is about like big plays, not the card big play, but actual big plays.
Well, for you it is.
Yeah, the format's not really about big play, but I did cast it today. So Counterspell is better. I still think you're probably supposed to take Professor. Professor's too good.
Yeah, that's what I think too. There is a color consideration. Professor's white. Counterspell's double blue. You're more likely to be able to cast Professor. And I think I would prefer the little easier to cast and more proactive card with Professor here as well, though it is close. I mean, I'd rather be in a deck that has blue in it than white, but I feel like I have a better chance of actually casting the Professor. Okay. So there you go. There's our Crack-A-Pack. Let's get into our main topic here, Luis. We've done this for a few different, sets, and this is always a fun show because it lets us kind of go deep on some of the cool combos that you can put together. So let's get into it. Where do you want to start?
Well, the first thing I want to do is talk about like what we're talking about today, which is combos, but more specifically, how do these kind of interact in Limited? Because I think when we say the word combo, and of course we did choose that phrasing intentionally, people think of combo decks, but we're not really talking about that. Because in Limited, you don't really draft combo decks very often. Mm-hmm. It's more finding synergies between like pairs of cards or groups of cards to get extra bang for your buck, to put these cards together and get more than the sum of your parts. And that's a huge part of Limited. You should really be looking to do that as much as you can because everyone's going to have good cards, but sometimes you take two cards that are like 6s and you add them together and you get like a 9. Right. Like because those two cards, they just like synergize perfectly. And all of a sudden, you're getting way more value than you normally would. And what you really want to do is try to look out for places where you can combine these cards nicely. And then also where, when do you play cards you normally wouldn't play? Like Clever Lumimancer is a card we're pretty down on the set review and I think is pretty bad. Like most of the people who have casted against me would have been better served not putting it in their deck. But I have gotten run over by the card and I've played it in my own deck, and in the right deck, it's awesome. So you got to kind of know what the right deck is, what the right combo of cards are, and then how does it change your pick orders? Because, sometimes you're going to take card A over card B most of the time, but when you have card C, all of a sudden card B becomes more appealing. So we're going to kind of give you a bunch of different thoughts on combos here that really can help you know when the value of these cards changes and just kind of how to combine them. So let's kind of start with Clever Lumimancer, actually. Show of Confidence is the 1-white instant that gives a creature a +1/+1 counter in Vigilance. I still don't really understand the Vigilance plus instant part. That doesn't really play out the way you might think.
Very strange, yeah.
But when you play it, you copy it for every instant or sorcery you've played before at this turn. And that does a couple things. One is it goes nuts with Magecraft. Because this card doesn't look very good. Because and even in the set review, we're like, how often are you going to copy this? Most of the time, you're going to cast this for like 2 copies total, with the original plus 1 more. Mm-hmm. It turns out with Magecraft, that's actually fine because you end up triggering a Magecraft for every copy as well. Mm-hmm. So when you have something like a Clever Lumimancer, like I've had these like primarily Silver Quill decks that play Lumimancer and like Eye Twitch and stuff, and then you set up this turn where you attack with everything. Maybe you Study Break first if you're really doing it. You cast like a Professor's Warning or a Beaming Defiance, then you cast Show of Confidence and your Lumimancer hits them for 10. Mm-hmm. Like you just blow out their blocks because they even might know it's coming, but they're like, well, you've got all these +1/+1 counters to distribute Magecraft triggers. Like, how am I supposed to block here? So I have found Lumimancer Show to be pretty good. Show of Confidence combines nicely with Guiding Voice, the learn and give a +1/+1 counter card.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And if you want to go off the deck I drafted today, Quandrix Pledge Mage plus Show of Confidence. There's the real payoff. Celestia Action Unite.
You did do that though today, right? Like you got to put those 2 cards together.
I definitely got to have some good like big play into Show of Confidence with Quandrix Pledge Mage in play is like you can't count that number of counters. So
yeah, your opponents didn't bother either; they just conceded.
So the main thing to look for with Show of Confidence is cheap spells, ideally combat tricks, Magecraft cards, and like aggressive creatures, and that actually is a package worth pursuing. I have had multiple decks where Show of Confidence is actually a very good card in the deck, which is nice too, because one of the things I didn't even touch on with when we talk about combos, which is relevant, is part of the strength of this is you're taking a card you can get 12th pick and turning it into one of your good cards. That's awesome for you, because you know what that means? That means you get to take your good cards first pick and then wheel cards that are still good for you. You're getting more value than they are. That's always a good place to be.
And that's one of the primary ways you can get ahead in a draft period.
Kind of in the same vein, Study Break, just an awesome card. I'm very high on the card now. 1 and a white, instant tap 2 creatures, learn. It's also got a mini combo with Expel, which exiles a tapped creature. And in fact, sometimes you'll have aggro decks that wouldn't normally be interested in Expel, but because you have Study Break, you can reliably, like if you have 2 Study Breaks, for example, tap 2 of your opponent's creatures and then exile one of them while tapped. So even if they're not attacking you, you still get the opportunity to use Expel. And then the classic, and this is kind of like pretty obvious, but Study Break into Expanded Anatomy ends a lot of games. Like you tap 2 creatures, maybe they even have something back, but they're just forced to chump because you just tapped their 2 creatures that would have had decent blocks. So Study Break is a good card, but these are some of the things you want to look for when you have it.
Yeah, we talked about Expanded Anatomy recently, but this is really one of those times where it shines. The thing to keep in mind, with this is do you have a great ability to clear away blockers, which Study Break does, but then also can you make those counters not just +1/+1 counters, but can they be on a flyer or a lifelinker or a trampler or anything like that? Because then you're kind of taking the power that was already there and making it even better from those counters.
I mean, now that you mention it, like another card which has gone up in my estimation in these decks is Stonerise Spirit, the 1 and a white 1/2 flyer, where you can exile a card to give a creature flying. It's just a great vehicle or vessel for all these +1/+1 counters. Like you just end up in a spot where when you Expanded Anatomy this, it's a 3/4 flyer. Like they've got to do something about that. Yeah. So it can help you curve out nicely. It's again a card that goes pretty late.
You smoked people with it today too.
Oh yeah,
I'd be high on it too if I were you.
Going into another color, Needle Thorndrake, a card I mentioned earlier as going up in my pick order in general, I've been happy with, but Arcane Subtraction is a very good combo with it. This is the 1 and a blue instant, give a creature -4/-0 and learn. And well, the combo is pretty simple. You've got your 1/1 Death Toucher. You use the subtraction to survive the combat, right? When you block like a 3/3 or something, and then it still kills their creature. One of the problems with subtraction is your creature needs to be beefy enough to win a fight already because it doesn't give any power. But Needlethorn Drake doesn't really have that problem. And it's not the end of the world if you just have to cast Arcane Subtraction for no value to just pull a summoning or something out of your sideboard. But once I have like 2 Needlethorn Drakes, I become pretty interested in Arcane Subtraction. And again, a card you can get pretty late. It's also, if you're playing best of 3, a really good sideboard against fight cards. When they go for like a mage's duel or something, and you have subtraction, you can at the very least make your creature survive.
Right. And then of course you're getting the value too from Learn.
A cool card, which kind of has combos built in. It's obvious this is a combo card, is Teach by Example, the blue-red hybrid card that copies your next instant or sorcery. But not only is the card good, like not great, but good. Like you'll play it in some decks. The main things I want to copy are like the 3-drop removal, like Burying Books, Heated Debate. Igneous Inspiration is the best because you deal 3, learn, deal 3, learn. You just have set
That's
up
pretty silly.
Awesome combo. But Serpentine Curve is another one on turn 6. Especially if you've been doing a good job casting like Strategic Planning or Curate, or you cast your Burying Books at some point, or whatever it is. You filled your graveyard with spells, then you're like, cast Teach by Example, cast Serpentine Curve, and get like 2 5/5s or 6 6s. And that's not that hard to do.
No, it's not. You mentioned too or actually you're going to mention, never mind, go ahead.
Oh, well, it works really well with Magecraft. Because if you have like a Quandrix Pledge Mage out and you go, cast Teach by Example, all right, it becomes a 3/3, and then you're like, cast a Heated Debate to kill your 2 creatures, well, it gets 2 more triggers. So you cast 2 spells and got 3 triggers because one of your spells said, hey, copy my next spell, and Magecraft looks at that. So a really good way to stack up Magecraft triggers, which are a lot of where these combos kind of at land.
Yeah, and that was the thing that wasn't super obvious about the card at first blush. But
totally.
Yeah.
Another undervalued card is Essence Infusion. This is the 1 and a black sorcery, gives a creature 2+1/+1 counters on lifelink. And look, again, this card's not great, but it's got some good uses. It can be really scary on a Blood Researcher. So this is a way to kind of get the party started. You put it on Blood Researcher and attack. You hit them for 4 with lifelink, and all of a sudden you've got a 5/5 menace in play. And look, you're vulnerable to Burying Books. You know, there are things they can do, but you're not going to do this into untapped mana, so you're probably going to get the 1 hit in. And then at that point, it's out of Heated Debate range, and if you've gained life previously, it's out of like Pigment Storm range. It's not unreasonable to want to play that in these Witherbloom decks. It also works really nicely on like Witherbloom Pledgemage or Daemogoth Titan or Woe Eater. Often one huge lifelink hit means that even if you're down a card, like they deal with your creature and you used a card to infusion it, gaining like 9 life, that's pretty close to a card.
It
like
is.
There's games where that's just going to be worth a card or sometimes 2, depending on how the game plays out. And then it works really nicely on little evasive creatures like Eye Twitch. Again, pumping your 1/1 flyer into a 3/3 gets lifelink just for 1 turn, but you've got a 3/3, you hit them with the big lifelink hit, and then they've got to deal with your Eye Twitch, and then you do get a card out of that because it learns when it dies, or something like Dinah, the 1/3 that whenever you gain life, it pings them for 1. So Essence Infusion isn't a card I play most of the time. I think I probably play it about a third of the time, maybe a fourth of the time. But when you do play it, you've got enough combos here. It does pull its weight. It's not a card. I'm not going to tell you that this card is great, but it's a card that has uses, which is better than not having uses, and that's what the card looked like.
Right. And then there's also just the life gain sub-theme in Witherbloom in general, right? There's just little bonuses you can get here or there, and that triggers all of those.
Speaking of which, I wanted to kind of go back to the Plum the Forbidden combo, which we talked about when we talked about Witherbloom, but I still find it to be a really important component of the deck. And this is one of the ones that's not really a 2-card combo as much as a combo of a bunch of different cards that all operate in the same vein. So Plum the Forbidden is the card that you can draw a card and lose life, but you can sack any number of creatures and it copies that many times. And it gives you multiple Magecraft triggers, so it's really, really good with Witherbloom Apprentice. It just drains them out. You can just sometimes hit them for 7 with Witherbloom. Just don't sack the Apprentice. The Apprentice won't see all the triggers if you sack it. So the other thing to know is you'll drain them before you lose any life, so you can be at 1. And in fact, actually, one of the guys I was coaching, we drafted this Witherbloom deck, and we are at 1 life, no cards in deck, but played Plum the Forbidden, sacking 5 creatures, and it got copied, 5 times, and the opponent was at 6, and Witherbloom Apprentice kills them before you draw any cards, before you take any damage. So,
that's sweet. You had no cards in library, and you won that?
Yeah, it was great. So besides Witherbloom Apprentice, which is the best of all these cards, like if you're in this kind of Witherbloom Plum combo deck, you should just be taking Witherbloom Apprentice above all of the cards. Also, you should be taking it really highly because it's just a great card. I mean, it's one of the reasons to be in Witherbloom. Then the token making, like Hunt for Specimens, Pest Summoning, and Tend the Pests, which go, the sack a creature to get that many pests. Witherbloom Pledgemage is also good. It only gains you life, so it's a lot less dangerous. But then if you have Dinah, or Dina, whatever, the 1/3 that pings them when you gain a life, you can kind of build your own Witherbloom Apprentice there. Plus, she also triggers off every pest sacrificed. So it all lines up to a combo engine that can drain them out from a surprisingly high life total, gain you a bunch of life, and draw you a bunch of cards, which means Witherbloom's got some good graveyard recursion. Sometimes you just get to do it again. Right. And this whole thing is my favorite way to draft Witherbloom, which I will admit is partially because I enjoy doing it, but I've also found it to be a fairly effective strategy because these cards, mostly stand on their own. Plum is maybe the worst card by itself, but there's so much support for all this stuff.
How important is Plum the Forbidden in this picture? Like, is this deck, how much worse is it if you don't have one of those?
It's an important part of it. It is definitely worse if you don't have a Plum because you give away the like big drain you for 7 turns or whatever.
Yeah.
But if you have Witherbloom Apprentice plus Dinah, you are draining them. Every time you play a spell, you're gaining a life and they're taking 2 damage. That's pretty good.
Okay.
When you have token making plus these things, there's other things to sacrifice them to. And just when you've done out, you can chump with a pest and they get drained for 1 and you gain 1. Like all that stuff kind of does add up. But Plum is kind of what ties it all together. Though Witherbloom Apprentice by far the most important part of it.
Right.
On the Witherbloom theme, Tenured Inkcaster is a card which I don't think is particularly good. This is the 5-mana 2/2 gives a +1/+1 counter, and then drains for 1 whenever you attack with a creature with a +1/+1 counter.
I thought it would be better, but again, the counters theme kind of failed.
And one thing to note is it does trigger for every creature with a counter. So you can set up some pretty big turns, and it's really good with Blood Researcher. That's the combo I'm interested in. Because, first of all, you can put a counter on Blood Researcher or something else if the Researcher already has one. Then you attack. The Inkcaster triggers for each creature that attacks with the counter, which means the Researcher gets +1/+1 for each creature that attacks with a counter as well.
Gets a counter for each of those? Yeah, that's good.
Out of control really fast. Like, this is where the Inkcaster is really dangerous. So when you have multiple Blood Researchers, I would tend to play the Inkcaster, though I wouldn't prioritize it because, again, it's just not that good by itself. Moving on to like Prismari or the red-based colleges, Academic Dispute. This is the 1 red instant that gives a creature reach if you want to, has to block this turn and learn. Very good with both the red Pledge Mages, Prismari or Lorehold, because you have a 3/3 and what is going to be a 3/2 first strike, both of which are pretty good at eating early plays. Like,
you can turn that into removal plus learn. Yeah.
Like, one of the easiest sequences is play a Prismari Pledge Mage. They play their 2 or 3 drop depending on who's on the play, and you just like dispute your 2/2 attack. You have to block, and then you get to learn. It's just one of the very easy and clean 2-for-1s. Also with Dispute, look for opportunities to give your own creature reach when they're attacking you. It's an instant. So sometimes they're like, attack you with a Frost Trickster. You're like, all right, give my my 2/3 a reach and block. And overall, just a very strong card. Note that you don't have a choice over what to block, so it's not like you're able to force a specific block. So make sure to only attack with the creature you want to get blocked, to give them no choice on the matter. It also kind of plays into the Stormkiln Artist type deck, where Stormkiln Artist can really go off with Magecraft. This is the one that has Magecraft, you get a treasure. And if you can untap with Stormkiln Artist and like go have a Teach by Example turn, or play Academic Dispute into like Expanded Anatomy, it's actually one of my favorites, you get a lot of good value. And the Artist goes off pretty hard, where it generates a bunch of treasures, so it's like a 7/2 or something, but also gives you enough mana to kind of do all the things you want to do, so it kind of fuels itself. There's a reason it's called Stormkiln Artist. It's actually, it's generating the storm. Yeah. So there's a lot you can do with this, and I've been pretty impressed with kind of how it's all played out.
Yeah, that card's pretty, like, if you have a bunch of the cheap cantrips, if you can, basically Magecraft a bunch, it actually does perform well. Even if you don't get it up to the big 7 power or whatever, it allows you to just do a lot of things if each thing you want to do is cheap enough. And if you're getting Magecraft triggers beyond the Artist itself, yeah, that's plenty of advantage enough to win a game.
So some of the combos we've talked about, like say Study Break, Expanded Anatomy, these are using good cards you're happy to have in your deck. This combo is 2 cards I actually don't want to play, but when are affected together, it's Tome Shredder plus Quintorius. Both cards I generally advise you not to put in your deck. I don't think they're very strong. But the combination of exactly these two, it gives you a 2/2 that taps to make a 3/2 and get +1/+1, assuming you've got enough spells. That's pretty good. Also, it's, I guess, a 4/2 because Quintorius isn't play pumping it. So yeah, Quintorius has been a bust, but if you can put together like a deck that has, let's say, 2 copies of Quintorius and 2 Tome Shredders, yeah, I would tend to go for that, even though for the most part, you really should avoid these cards. Tome Shredder really has not delivered.
I'm still holding out hope for Quintorius to be decent.
Oh yeah, you go ahead and drop your Warhold.
I'm still over here just hanging in there for my old buddy, the Elephant Cleric. Yeah. I did get a chance to play him with really good cards, and then he performed really well, like Radiant Scroll Wielder and Return Pass Caller. But that doesn't happen that often.
Yeah,
never. Might be more accurate.
This next one's a cool one. It's a bunch of combos with Fortifying Draft. So, Fortifying Draught is a 1 mana spell that you gain 2 life, then it give a creature +X or X the number of life you've gained this turn. So by itself, it's just 1 mana, gain 2, give a creature +2/+2. There's a lot of things you can do to combo with this. This is soon becoming one of my favorite cards, and I think it's quite strong. Reflective Golem is a really good combo. You cast on your Golem, you copy it. All of a sudden, you're gain 2, give a creature +2/+2, then gain 4 and give the Golem +4/+4. And obviously, gain 2 more, give the
gain
golem
2 more,
+4.
but then there's +4/+4. That's sweet.
And that can do a ton of pumps out of nowhere. Of course, if you've got a blood researcher in play, it's also really good. Gives you extra triggers or Dyna. And then it's also a 1-mana trick that has just a lot of ways to really get out of control. And then when you look at Mystical Archive, we're going to cover the Mystical Archive cards as well, but the sneak preview there is Weather the Storm. Mystical Archive is just out of the Mystical Archive is just a beating with Fortifying Draft. You're like, play a spell. Let's say you play whatever it is to kill one of their things. Cast Fortifying Draught, and in response, cast Weather the Storm. Gain 9 life. Give your creature +11/+11. Like,
that's sweet.
Out of control. Good.
You go full control and then get all of it. That's great.
Oh yeah, you get to do it all. So it's a card that has definitely moved up in my pick order as well. Speaking of green cards that can lead to effective turns, we talked up Mage Duel earlier. It's a really good combo with Quandrix Pledge Mage, just because you are, even just those 2 cards by itself, you've got a 4/5 battling. Usually you've played something else, like the curve that I've done many many is like turn 3 Pledge Mage, turn 4 Field Trip or Pop Quiz into Mage Duel. You have 5/6 eating their biggest creature. You're ahead on board at this point, and you've drawn extra cards or ramped a land plus drawn a card.
Yeah, you when you were saying earlier about how you need to be doing things in the format, that's doing things. Like that'll get the job done.
And Quandrix Pledge Mage in general has really delivered. It's a good card. You should be taking it. Daemogoth Titan and Daemogoth Woe Eater, these are both a little more difficult to use. This is the 4-mana green-black hybrid 11/10 that you have to sack a creature whenever it attacks or blocks, and then the 7/6 that you have to sack on upkeep. But if you sack it to any effect, by the way, so you can sack it to other things. Your opponent gets drained for 2. They discard a card. You draw a card. So Tend the Pests is the best thing to combine with them, where you sack one of them to make 7 or 11 1/1 pests. It's usually pretty easy to win. You don't actually usually need other combos. 11 pests is going to win you most games.
Yeah.
The other thing you can do with like the Woe Eater on 6 mana is play Woe Eater, just immediately sack it to Deadly Brew. You drain them for 2, they discard, you draw, they have to sack a creature. You also then get to bring back another creature, and just really looking for places to utilize the text of when you sacrifice Daemogoth Woe Eater, but not to its upkeep trigger. Sacrificing it for value somewhere is the sort of thing that you really want to do if you can.
Yeah, I've found that when people play the Woe Eater, I'm not that scared of it unless they have the ability to sacrifice it, and then it's very, very annoying. But if they're just like trying to play it straight up and just like sack their creatures to it, I'm like, yeah, you keep doing that and I'll take care of it later. It doesn't kill you usually right away, but it's good for value. Yeah. I
mean, is there a better feeling than they play that? They sack like a Scurrid colony because they haven't made pests. They attack and you bury it in books.
Oh, like, that's so brutal.
They're supposed to just concede at that point.
Right.
Like, there's
that's a game ender. They maybe quit the game.
So edging back towards Prismari, Elemental Expressionist is a weird one. This is the 4 red-blue hybrid mana 4/4, and it has Magecraft of until end of turn, your target creature gets, when this would die, exile it, and when you exile it, make a 4/4. So first thing to note is what this kind of does at a base level is when one of your creatures dies, you get a 4/4. All right, fine. But the thing to realize about this is you can stack the trigger on the same creature multiple times. Like if you played 3 spells, all targeted the same creature, when it died, it would exile and then trigger for each of those spells, and you would get a bunch of 4/4s. You can also target the Expressionist itself. So a fine play is to attack, they block with a 4/4, and you just cast some spell, target the Expressionist, trade, and get a 4/4. Like,
just pop quiz and let damage happen. Yep.
It's also really cute with Resculpt, the card that exiles a creature and gives the controller a 4/4, because you'll get the 4/4 from Resculpt and it'll proc the Elemental Expressionist. It doesn't care why it was exiled.
That's funny.
But I still wouldn't.
But then you have to have both of those cards in your deck.
No. You still shouldn't play Resculpt, but it is an interesting card and a funny combo to like keep in mind. I think that those things are something you want to look for. But Expressionist is a very good card, and just using it's a weird card. Part of this too is what we're talking about here is you're not going to have played with some of these weird rares or had these scenarios come up, and so we kind of want to get out ahead of those if we can. Mm-hmm. Speaking of scenarios that are basically never going to come up, Harness Infinity, the mythic rare that's like 1 green, 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 black, 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 draw your graveyard, plus Auric Lore Mage, the 4-mana 3/3 that taps to put a spell into your graveyard from your deck, or put any card. This card, you just sit there with the Lore Mage entombing all your good cards, and then you cast Harness Infinity.
Oh, okay, that is sweet. That's a rare mythic rare combo, but that's what those are the dreams we dream, right? That is awesome.
You gotta try to live the dream at least.
I don't think I've played either of those cards yet.
Yeah,
but I'm in. I'll tell you, if I get a chance, I'll do it.
Yeah, no, so that one's sweet. A couple cards that you have to be aware can target your opponent's creature for value. One, I think I've cast Make Your Mark like 7 or 8 times, and 6 of those times or 5 of those times have been on my opponent's creatures. This is the red-white hybrid trick that gives a creature +1/+0, and when that creature dies, you make a 3/2. Mm-hmm. So if one of your opponent's creatures is going to die, you can just cast on your opponent's creature, and then you get a 3/2. So, like for example, today, my opponent attacked a 2/2 into my Quandrix Pledge Mage when I had mana on tap. So first of all, a little dubious. Second, I cast Make Your Mark on my Reflective Golem, then copied it onto their 2/2. My Quandrix Pledge Mage became a 4/4. Their 3/2 died into my 4/4, and I got a 3/2. And that's the sort of value you can get out of the card. And then same with Rush Rebirth. This is the green-black instant. And it says when a creature dies this turn, search your library for a creature of lower cost, put it into play. But you can target your opponent's creatures. So if they have a big creature that's about to die, you can cast this on that creature. Mm-hmm. Another rare that you can use is a Silver Quill Silencer. This is the 3/2 that lets you name a card, and they can't play the named card unless they pay 3 life and let you draw a card. It's pretty effective against Learn. If you have a position where you've got Silencer, which is a fine card to play, it's a 2-mana 3/2. That's not a bad card for like a Silver Quill aggro deck. And it's not going to do anything on board. Consider holding it, because sometimes they might go like field trip, pick up Elemental Summoning, and then you can just play it, name Elemental Summoning, and it'll annoy them at the very least.
Yeah, it nails fractals really well because people always wait till the next turn so they get the biggest.
Fractal summoning for sure.
Yeah.
Another good Silver Quill combo is Spiteful Squad. This is the 4-mana 2/2 Death Touch that puts its counter somewhere else when it dies, and your sideboard. Don't play that card. Biblioplex Assistant is a good one. This is the.
That was spiteful of you. Oh my God.
I have not been impressed with the card. Biblioplex Assistant plus good spells. It seems obvious, but Biblioplex Assistant's not a particularly good card. This is the 4-mana 2/1 flyer that when it enters the battlefield puts a spell from your graveyard on top of your deck. So you're not getting card advantage. It's card parity, and you're paying 4 for a 2/1 flyer. But when I look to play this card is when I have something like Multiple Choice or Crackle with Power, just these really powerful spells.
Magma Opus.
Yeah, or even like a Explosive Welcome sometimes, or Creative Expression. But when I have something that yes, I am willing to play a bad rate creature and skip my draw step, but you are, and in fact with Multiple Choice, you can actually bounce the Biblioplex Assistant as one of the modes.
Ooh, that's kind of cool.
Which I have done before. So for the most part, you shouldn't be playing the Assistant, but you should keep an eye out for the times when it is good to play the Assistant.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that, just a good rule of thumb for that, when is it good, is if the card that you can get, is basically worth multiple cards to you. Like, I'm not as interested in putting like a 1-for-1 removal spell back on top of my library and being like, okay, we're doing it. But if I can get, just look at the spells that you have, Lorehold Command or whatever, right? Just something that can get me multiple cards worth of value, then I'm much more interested.
Cody's a big one. This is the Codex, the 3-mana 1/4. You can pay 4, tap it, add Wooburg, and then the next spell you cast has spell cascade. It goes through your deck, top of your deck, until it finds a cheaper spell and then plays it. Mm-hmm. But you can't play permanents. A lot has been said about this card, but I will reiterate that the main way to use it is to play a bunch of learn cards and summonings, so you can have threats to finish the game and get value. I actually think this card is overrated right now. I think the card is definitely good in some decks, but people are going pretty nuts because it's a really cool card. I get it. It does something that's very different. It tells you to make an all-spell deck. It stops you from playing permanents. It has a powerful output. But it's also not I've had mixed results with it where, sometimes it's great. And sometimes you build a deck around it, and then they kill it, and your deck is just kind of a bad deck. Or, you don't draw it or whatever. Or sometimes you draw it, and then you draw 2 of the permanents you have in your deck, because it's not like you have 0. You're going to have a couple. So
yeah,
I have had mixed results with it. It is definitely powerful, has high output, but not a card I think you can like fully rely on in the way that you might want to.
I keep putting it in a deck, playing it, and then being like, oh man, this sucks. Like I can't cast anything from my hand. And then my opponent just panics and kills it. And I'm like, oh, sweet.
Yeah.
You know, it a heated debate. This is awesome.
One thing to keep in mind with the card is also that you can kill it yourself. That's something I've had where I play Cody, get like value from 3 or 4 triggers, and then use a heated debate to kill it myself to unlock the cards in my hand. Mm-hmm. Another Mystical Archive card that I found to be awesome is Time Warp. This is the 3 you take an extra turn. Because it turns out there's enough ways to copy it that you can get some like fantastic value out of this card where you like Rutha's the best one, but Teach by Example, if you know, can also do the trick. And then you also have some ways to get the card back. It can do some really, really cool stuff. So Time Warp's a card I would actually pick very highly. Same.
It also has a relatively high floor, right? Like assuming that your deck has the ability to get to that 5 mana consistently, like, you know, you're kind of free rolling it if you can get to that point.
Yeah. Also, like in most formats, it would just be an extra untapped draw card, maybe an attack. Here, you can get a Magecraft trigger too. Like, you know, you get a tiny bit of extra value. Speaking of Magecraft, both Tendrils of Agony and Grapeshot work very nicely with Magecraft. Get you a lot of triggers. Grapeshot's the better one because it's cheaper and can hit creatures. But Tendrils is not a 0. I've had some decks that are actually okay playing Tendrils as like a drain 4 to 6 that maybe triggers a Magecraft card. Mostly in like my aggro Silver Quill deck. Not a card I'm like first picking or even third picking, but a card that I'm keeping in mind.
Yeah, I've definitely had good success with Grapeshot just being a do 2 or 3 spread out how I want, which is actually quite a powerful effect. I have not played Tendrils. I guess I'm a coward.
Channel's a funny card with Bookworm and Fractal Summoning. This is a little more speculative. I'm not really recommending this, but I had a deck today with 2 Bookworms where I would have played Channel in my deck. And not even 100% sure it's right, but it does seem like it could be sweet.
Yeah, it does.
Natural Order plus Bookworm is kind of legit, though. If you've got enough ways to make pests or have cheap green creatures, casting a Bookworm for 4 mana, I mean, that's a real thing. So
it is often game ending. Yeah, that card's such a hard card to deal with, and it closes out the game so quickly because you can't chump block it that you can actually just win the game off of that.
And then backing off of combos, because those are the Mystical Archive cards we wanted to talk about. We've got some just notes about cards that might not be readily apparent, like Spectacle Mage lowers X spell as long as it's over 5. So you can go turn 3 Spectacle Mage, turn 4 multiple choice with all the modes if you want.
Yeah, and that's something, you know, you'll often, I see this on Arena sometimes. You know, I saw somebody cast Fractal Summoning and they left a mana up, and it's because they punched in the number that they thought that they could get, but they had the Spectacle Mage, and they didn't realize that gave them actually an extra freebie on it. So, you know, that's something to keep in mind there too. Flunk is kind of interesting just with the timing of it, right? If they cast a spell, so let's say they have like 4 cards in their hand and they cast a spell, they actually do have 3 cards in their hand as long as that spell's on the stack. Like even if it's a card draw spell and it was going to grab them a bunch of stuff, you know, you can pretty easily take advantage of those windows if you're waiting for that one moment with Flunk. You know, the way it works is when you cast a spell, it leaves your hand and goes onto the stack. And then, you know, most of the time when it resolves, it goes to your graveyard. It is in those different zones, and stack is not hand. So there are windows where you can use Flunk, even if somebody's casting something that can draw cards. So keep that in mind.
I had a funny situation that came up with that, by the way. I cast Retriever Phoenix going down to 5 cards in hand. So my opponent flunked it in response to the trigger because I was going to go up to 6 cards and they wouldn't be able to kill it. So then the trigger resolved and I just chose to put it back into play instead of getting a card from my sideboard. So you could argue that they flunked that particular interaction.
Yeah, that worked against them. Heated debate, you know, they did spell this out, but I still see people miss it sometimes, which is, you know, it can't be countered, but that does count for ward. The reason that people, I think, don't do this is because when you play on Arena, it still says, do you want to do the ward thing?
It's very scary text.
Yeah. And it's like, you can decline that at that point, and then your heated debate will still resolve and kill the thing. But, you know, it is when it says, do you want to do this? You're like, well, I still want to kill my creature, or I still want to kill the creature. It will still kill the creature and you won't have to pay. Particularly with, Owling, whatever, the one that charges 3 life.
Yeah.
Right?
Owling Shield Mage.
Yeah. Owling Shield Mage is the one that really comes up with, or comes up on, because it's not actually asking you to pay more mana, which you may or may not have. So there you go. Little tiny thing, but Overgrown Arch taps to gain a life. But the second ability actually isn't a tap ability. It's 2 mana and sacrifice it. So sometimes you'll see people like gain a life on end step, then, on their turn, they'll just pay 2 and sack it, but you can actually gain the life first. So don't forget that extra little thing. Ether Helix, you know, if you've played with it a bunch, you'll know this, but it does require a target of a permanent in your graveyard to be able to even put Ether Helix on the stack. It's not up to. It's a little bit unforgiving of a design where, you know, you'd think if, hey, I just need to bounce a creature for 5 mana, you know, at sorcery speed, that isn't exactly giving you really what you want out of the card, but you actually can't. So, you know, if you do have it in your hand, especially if your opponent has like a token out or something like that, you know, don't be afraid to trade off like your 2-drop for their random 2-drop, even if it's not the best trade in the world, just so that you can set up for Ether Helix, down the line. It's
really weird to me because that's not like, I can't imagine it's to make Ether Helix weaker, because I don't think it's like, that important of a goal. It's not like it's that good of a card. It's just fine. It's good, but it's
does
kind of
feel
player
weird.
Unfriendly.
I don't know. It's a little hostile. Weird. Yeah. You'd think it would be up to.
Thorndrake a lot better, by the way.
What's that?
It does make Needle Thorndrake a lot better. It's the perfect 2-drop to trade off before you have Helix. Also, this can bring back Planeswalkers. Like, it can bring back any permanent. So I have splashed for this when I have, like, you know, some like a Will or a Professor Onyx or something like that, because it's just so brutal when you get back like a Planeswalker.
Hey, we should mention that too. You know, many of the removal spells that are printed these days actually do target Planeswalkers, but you may not think of that because it comes up so rarely. You know, Mage Hunter's Onslaught's a good example. 2 black sorcery, destroy target creature or Planeswalker. You know, the change that they've made to these, going back to what we had talked about before with Hexproof and Indestructible and stuff, is so great, because it means that Planeswalkers can come down in limited now and they can get value straight away, but you can actually deal with them, right? Where it's not just the game's over if you don't have a great attack on it. So keep that in mind too. Expressive Iteration, that's the red-blue, you know, kind of card draw spell. Boy, the first time you cast this on turn 2 going, I'm just going to cast my cantrip because I don't have anything else to do anyway, is when you go, oh, never mind. This was not what I was meant to do. Casting Expressive Iteration on turn 3 or later is so much better, because you look at the top 3 cards, one goes on the bottom of your library, one goes into exile, but you can play it this turn, and one goes into your hand. So this, if you're going to play it early in the game, wait till turn 3, cast Expressive Iteration, get a land because you're likely to, for your exiled card, and then the card that you want to actually have in your hand goes into your hand, and then you get rid of the worst one. Then you just play the land sort of for free from that. If you play it on 2, you don't have that option. So, you know, even if you don't have anything to do better, it's almost always incorrect to play it on 2, and at least wait till turn 3.
Also be really careful about how you click, because
I know.
Intuitively, it feels like you should click the card first to put in your hand. They got that right.
Yep.
And then you should click the second card you want, which is the exile card.
Yes.
But the second card you're clicking is the ones you're putting back in your deck.
It is so brutal.
Yeah, I think they could use a little bit more of a UI expert when it comes to most things on Arena, is what it feels like.
I screwed that up the first time. I thought, well, where's the card I wanted? And it's like the one I really wanted.
You want to talk about UI? Have you ever tried to rummage off a lesson or off a learn card?
Yes, I have. In fact, I did it on stream the first time that I needed to actually rummage, because it's so rare that you actually do. And I just said, no, I want to decline that because I want to do the thing. And then chat was like, nope, you just missed because you have to hit your hand, you know.
I don't think I've seen a person who has done it the right way. So what happens is you cast your lesson. It says pick a card from your sideboard or decline. You're like, oh yeah, I don't want a card from my sideboard. I want to decline.
Yes.
No, what you need to do is go back to the thing on the left, click your hand, then click a card to discard. Again, built by someone maybe who hasn't played Magic before. I don't know.
That was tough. I went through all of these things the first time. That's steep. Last one came up actually on stream as well, which is if you have Kelpie Guide, tap it to untap another permanent, it kind of makes you expel proof, right? Like at least as long as your opponent is willing to just put expel on the stack, which is what they did against me, and I save my creature. So, that's kind of an interaction that'll come up every once in a while because expel does see a decent amount of play.
So lots of combos here.
Yeah, lots of sweet combos.
And a lot of good ways to kind of get additional value. So I both want to get additional value out of my good cards by making them even better, but also it's really important to try to get good value out of cards that are normally not that good, because you can get those later and get a lot of kind of an extra edge of, I know how to use Clever Lumimancer or, Essence Infusion, that sort of thing. So a lot of cool stuff. And this is a set that's very high on this stuff. Part of the reason we don't do this every single set is that not every set has, kind of the necessary like depth of combo potential to really be worth spending a whole episode on it. But Strixhaven certainly does, and we probably missed some of them.
Well, BK wants us to know that Ether Helix bounces lands too.
Yeah, I said no, it can't actually in the chat, though that's not actually true.
It can. Yeah, I've done it once. I've done it one time, but
I just didn't want to hand it to him,
Yeah, that was just another little assist from a resource on the sidelines there. Thanks, BK. Okay, let's call it a show there, Luis. And of course, if you want to find us on social media, I'm Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. If you've got other sweet combos that you've pulled off in the format, send them to us on Twitter. I'm always curious about what people are up to, because Magic's such a complicated game that there's always going to be more things, especially when you open it up to 3-card combos where things get really wacky, or if you're involving multiple rares that don't come together very often, that can be really interesting. So hit us up there. Make sure you check out Channel Fireball for your Magic needs. CFP Pro, it's really very affordable to get really premium content from some of the best Magic players out there. If you're spending any amount monthly on Magic, you can basically make it free. You can pay $10 for it, but then get $10 in store credit at Channel Fireball. So it effectively evens out. You can also just pay $5 a month if it's easier for you. And that gets you access to all types of in-depth Magic content to help you improve your game, which is, of course, why you're here as well. So make sure you check them out. And again, if you do get anything, use the affiliate code LR. You can find everything related to the podcast on lrcast.com. We'll see you next time.
So we're getting some previews of the Magic D&D set just starting to drop, and they've nailed the flavor on some of them. Like during the show, they previewed Vorpal Sword and Portable Hole and the art for like a Beholder card. So I wanted to say, here's what my list of cards that I would really hope are in the D&D set. I'm not going to say the set's incomplete without them, because there's so much you can pull from D&D. It's just like got a ton of stuff you could do. I would be disappointed if there wasn't some kind of Magic Missile. Like literally, they haven't made a card called Magic Missile yet because it's so D&D themed, but I would love to see Magic Missile. Would be cool if it was uncounterable, because that would be pretty in flavor for D&D. It's not literally uncounterable in D&D, but it is very hard to stop. It always hits. They've already used the Fireball, and that's kind of a rough reprint, but Fireball is maybe the most iconic spell in D&D of all time. So if you'd ever could justify printing Fireball, it would be in this set. I'm a little skeptical of cards that have both X and Y in them, but
yeah, you need a math degree to be able to
Fireball's
figure it
a reader, but oh man. They put in Tiamat, which is like a dragon god, so that's definitely good. Would love to see like Hold Person as another good spell that like maybe like freezes or stuns a creature, makes it unable to untap. Some of the classic monsters, there's got to be a red dragon in there. It's just I don't know what's going on. If not, there's got to be a lich in there, and a new lich. We don't want one of these one of the ones from like a reprint or whatever. The old liches they have are cool, but we could use a new one. I would love to see, like, we already have a Beholder that was definitely on my list. I think that you're going to have adventures represented in a bunch of ways. So like low-level adventures, high-level adventures. I would actually like to see some named characters from D&D, some Elminster or Drizzt or whatever you want to put in, like some of the like iconic D&D characters, maybe references to like Waterdeep. There's just so much you can do, and this is such a cool set that I'm really stoked for it. This is probably the set I've looked forward to most in Magic, just because I love D&D and I love Magic, and the streams. Like when Wizards bought TSR, the company that used to make D&D. Like, this is what I would hope would have happened a decade ago, but I understand all the reasons maybe it wouldn't. Now it's finally happening, and it's just like there's so much I would love to cram in there. Like, if there was anything that would ever make me want to really want to work on Magic, and there's a lot of reasons for and against. The biggest reason against, by the way, is I love competing in Magic tournaments. It's really hard for me to give that up, But the D&D set was like one that could have maybe pulled me in. I don't know. So really stoked about this. You're going to hear more about the D&D set as time goes on, I'm sure.
All right.